Hello and welcome to Good Morning Thailand. I'm your host for today, Jay, and joining me again is Mike.
Good morning, Thailand.
Right, Good Morning Thailand indeed. A quick update, if you missed out on any of our top headlines from yesterday, you can watch Thailand News Today with Jet over here, and any of our other shows, Good Morning Thailand and Thaiger Bites. Also, check them out, click the I button, and you will see the links to the videos. Now, I have a quick message for all of you. We're on a mission here at the Thaiger, Mike. We're on the hunt for 100,000 subscribers. Currently, we're about, I believe 90,791. We're hitting there. And we watch our videos and we realize that about 80% to 90% of you are actually unsubscribed. So please do us a favor, and if you like the video, if you like our shows, please click like, please comment, and please subscribe. And we hope that by the end of the weekend, we will reach 100,000 subscribers with your help. So help us out.
And if you do, we will set up an OnlyFans for Thaiger.
Yeah.
With juicy content, really juicy content that is too juicy for YouTube.
Yes.
Like apples.
Yeah.
Pears, really juicy fruit, just pictures of fruit basically.
You heard it here first. Right, today we will be talking about Thailand and if it's actually worth coming to Thailand anymore to do businesses and to live here, and compare it to other Southeast Asian countries, Vietnam in general, and basically have a debate and have a look at all the aspects of what makes Thailand great to do business here and what makes perhaps Vietnam great to do business there. That's all coming up on today's show. We'll be back right after this. Hello and once again welcome to Good Morning Thailand. I'm Jay, joined here by Mike, and we'd like to start the show off with a quick COVID update. Today in Thailand, we had 16,031 new COVID infections, the number slightly up from yesterday. 220 COVID-related deaths. 15,417 people have recovered and released from hospitals. Currently, we still have 143,038 people still currently in care. Mike, you had some stats that you wanted to talk about today.
Yeah, so there's some really interesting stats that actually John McGee, who is actually the old owner of the Phuket Gazette, which is now the Thaiger. So big shout out to John McGee. You can find him on Facebook if you want to. He's creating his own graphs in relation to stats, and I found a really interesting one he put out about number of beds and how many patients are occupying beds in Phuket. And so numbers are, which we'll overlay the graph here, is that out of total beds, there's about 2,500. There's only 20% left available beds in hospital, but out of these people, out of about the 2,500 beds, over half of them are occupied by asymptomatic or people showing very, very mild symptoms of COVID. So, it's going back to this whole conversation and, the rhetoric which I'm pushing forward, which is why are people who are not sick utilising hospital beds? Makes no sense. And here's a graph. Check out John McGee on Facebook. He's got lots of information about it.
Right, thank you for that, Mike. It's now time to check out Thailand's headlines and all the top stories across the country with Caitlin. We'll be back right after this.
Hi, it's Kate with the Thaiger here with this morning's top headlines. The Thai Food and Drug Administration says it will consider a request by Sinopharm's local representatives in Thailand to use their vaccine for children 3 years old and older. Tech, the distributor of the Sinopharm vaccine within Thailand, has requested permission to lower the age group the vaccine is approved for from 18 years old to children over the age of 3. The Deputy Secretary General of the FDA says their committee is now considering the request and whether the vaccine is effective and safe enough to lower the age limit. They say they will make a decision within the next 30 days. The Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines are approved in Thailand for those 12 years old and up. With the COVID-19 infection rate still fairly high in Phuket, organizers of the annual Vegetarian Festival are discussing how big next month's event can be. Despite its name, the week-long festival isn't exactly known for its vegetarian food. It's actually more known for self-mutilation. During street processions, some pierce their cheeks with large objects and are said to enter a trance-like state, channeling spirits through their body. Some slice their tongues with blood dripping down onto the street. Others appear to be in a trance and walk barefoot as firecrackers explode on the ground. Tourists flock to Phuket for the annual event, and last year people were advised to practice social distancing and wear face masks. This year, the Phuket governor says the event scale will be based on the COVID-19 situation in the days leading up to the festival. If the COVID-19 situation is under control, the Phuket Vegetarian Festival can go on as originally planned. But if infections are still fairly high, officials may need to set a limit on the event. A hacker stole personal information of more than 40,000 patients at a Bangkok hospital's kidney institute. It is the second hack this week after personal data of around 10,000 patients was stolen from a hospital in Phetchabun. In Bangkok, the hospital director said on Monday that the staff could not access the database of patients. The information includes personal details and treatment history. The director says the man called the hospital on Monday. He spoke in English saying he hacked the system and asked for a payment in return for the information. The director filed a complaint with police and sent in the recorded conversation. Immigration police arrested 3 Russian nationals in Phuket for allegedly stealing a painting valued at 50 million baht in Pattaya back in November 2020. 4 suspects who allegedly assaulted a Swiss man and stole the expensive art had previously been arrested and released on bail. One of them has since left the country, and the 3 others were arrested yesterday by Phuket Immigration Police and taken to the local immigration office for questioning. They allegedly told police they bought the painting and denied assaulting the man. The suspects are being transferred to Chonburi for legal proceedings. Pattaya has been pummeled by heavy rains over the past few days, causing flooding in residential areas. Roads flooded last night after heavy rain for several hours, dumping between 30 and 70 centimeters of water on some roads across Pattaya. And the weather forecast calls for more torrential downpours over the next few days. The Thai Meteorological Department says the approach of Tropical Storm Khansan means most regions in Thailand are in for some very wet conditions. And those are the top headlines. Now back to the show.
You're watching Good Morning Thailand. I'm Jay, joined by Mike, and today we're going to head into our topic of Thailand and compare it in specific to Vietnam. Now, we hear a lot of chatter, even amongst our viewers, and a lot of the people online who've suggested, oh, leave Thailand, let's go to Vietnam, it's better for business, it's better for living. And due to COVID, post-COVID, some of the government issues, a lot of people have strong opinions about how they don't want to be an expat in Thailand anymore and how they want to move to Vietnam for different reasons. Some for business, some for living, some for just enjoyment. Apparently, it's a better place to be. So what we're going to do today is compare Thailand and look at certain aspects, 6 to 7 main differences between Thailand and Vietnam, and just have a general chat. We're not trying to say one country is better than the other, but let's just have a quick comparison and have a look at why people would choose to go to Thailand or people would choose to go to Vietnam. So, Mike, let's firstly start off with, both the countries actually have a very rich culture and a very rich history, where, I believe Vietnam has 3 different types of religions. They have Buddhism, they have Taoism, and Confucianism, and Thailand mainly is a Buddhist country. So I believe in terms of culture and in terms of religion, both countries have beautiful religions and have their own beliefs. I don't think there would be a problem in living any of those countries. Have you ever been to Vietnam?
Yes, I've been to Vietnam multiple times. I mean, I've got a business there, so I like Vietnam a lot. I mean, I'm definitely biased because I live in Thailand and I love Thailand. I love being an expat in Thailand, but I also appreciate some of the amazing things that Vietnam has to offer. And I think on a cultural perspective, I think, because Vietnam was, occupied by the Chinese and the French, there is that element that exists in the cultural differences between Thailand and Vietnam versus Thailand, which has never been occupied. But I mean, this is where the strange comparison is. I think Thailand is massively influenced by the West.
Yes.
And, much more so than, say, Vietnam does. And Vietnam has such a more diverse culture than what Thailand currently has. And I think that's quite interesting because Thailand's never been technically colonized.
Yeah. That's true. All right, let's talk about the booming economy. In general, people always try to say that, Vietnam's going places. You're right, in a way where Vietnam still has a lot of catching up to do to Thailand. Thailand is a more popular destination for tourists. And so in terms of its economy, I believe Vietnam, I've got some stats here, the growth forecast for 2021, let's just keep it relevant for this year, in Thailand has been revised. So it was supposed to increase by 3.4%. However, due to, heavy impacts of COVID, second wave last year, the third wave this year, that number has gone down to 2.2%. However, in Vietnam, there has actually been a prediction of 4.8% of the overall GDP to increase. So, if people are looking at stats like this and thinking that, okay, Thailand is not doing that great, but Vietnam just keeps on improving, is there a future? Because I know of people who've owned businesses in places in Phuket and in Bangkok, foreigners, expats, Koreans and Japanese, who've actually moved to Vietnam for these reasons, because they feel like there's a brighter future there. Business in Thailand is not as good anymore. It's a lot more expensive here. Let's go to Vietnam. What would you say to that?
I mean, when I talk to venture capitalists, the general rhetoric is Vietnam, Vietnam, Vietnam. That, there was two hot markets that they were interested in Southeast Asia. One was Myanmar. The other one was Vietnam. I think what's happened in Myanmar, with the whole, coup that's happened there, has basically ruled that one out. But Vietnam seems to be a hotbed for innovation. A very young population that are really innovating at a very rapid pace. Obviously a much larger population than Thailand. I think it's got around close to 100 million, so around 30 to 40% bigger than Thailand. And they seem to be moving at a rapid scale in innovation, digitalization of their economy, where Thailand seems to be held back by more bureaucratic nonsense, which is really going on, which is slowing down the growth of the country. So I think, from what I understand as an investor and from speaking to other investors, that Vietnam is definitely a hotbed for innovation and investment. So I think there's probably more opportunities for businesses in Vietnam than there would be in Thailand, depending on what business sector you're basically focusing on.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about infrastructure, and let's look at different aspects of what makes a country more accessible and, have a better way of living. So let's start with, for example, travel and transportation. Now, convenience of travel. Now, I believe it is, there's many flights to cities in Vietnam. However, it's a lot more easier to access Thailand. There's a lot more direct flights from many different countries, but within the country. Now, I've heard a lot of complaints of some Vietnamese friends that I have, people who live there, and also people who've traveled to Vietnam. They say, domestic travel with buses and trains is still lacking. It's still not up to par. Whereas in Thailand, there's many different modes of, different transportation. Basically, you can get to many places, either with trains, with buses, with vans within the city, and especially the roads as well. Now, if you're within the city in Bangkok, and even if you're traveling, your road trip going to different provinces, the roads are pretty good. However, in Vietnam, the infrastructure of the roads, once you get outside of the main cities, is still lacking and it's still not as good as Thailand. Do you think that would play a factor in whether people choose where they live?
Yeah, I think massively. I think because Thailand's had that huge influx of tourism, I think there are airports, situated all over Thailand now, that caters for a fluid, domestic transfer routes. Okay. So you can pretty much get anywhere. Yeah. And there's loads of flights, for example, between different destinations, and it's very diverse in relation where you can go. There's new airports popping up all the time, around Thailand. So I think domestic travel within Thailand is much better than what Vietnam offers. I think as well the international travel within Thailand, coming to Thailand, is much better than what Vietnam offers. I mean, there's multiple reasons for this. I mean, Bangkok is one of the biggest, airports, in the world, seeing the most influx of tourists, and and a big hub for connecting, the Australia and the rest of Europe. So it's a bigger hub destination. There's many international airports. I mean, Phuket is an international airport. I mean, Utapao just outside Pattaya is an international airport. Chiang Mai takes international flights. There's lots of different international airports where Vietnam has that limitations, And I think this is in relation not just to the actual air travel, but visa process as well.
Yes.
I mean, it's very difficult to get a tourist visa in relation to Vietnam. It's getting easier, but it's nowhere as fluid as what Thailand offers in relation to access of Thailand for tourists.
Yeah.
So I think in relation to air travel alone and coming here from an international destination, I mean, Thailand's a much better place and easier access to come through. And I think because of that, the roads will have seen, much more improvement in domestic infrastructure. I mean, when you go to Bangkok with this, with the BTS and and the underground, it's very, very connected. It's pretty much super easy to get anywhere.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, if you can make the comparison, some of the Western countries, it's actually more convenient than some of these established Western cities like London, where it has a very old, underground system, which is, which kind of is very crowded. Whereas Bangkok really offers that flexibility. So, I think in relation to how you can get around, I think Thailand is a hands-down winner in comparison to Vietnam.
Okay, right. Let's talk about cost of living. Now, the pricing for various different things in Thailand is, on average, 6% higher than in Vietnam. Now, but that makes sense because, Thailand as a booming nation, as a place to be, as a travel destination, has been a lot more popular than Vietnam. A lot more people know about the places like Phuket, Chiang Mai, Utapao, like you just said, which is actually the airport, but near Pattaya, a lot more places are well known in Thailand. However, in Vietnam, perhaps you only know Ho Chi Minh City, Hanoi. I know about the hidden gems, but that's my point. There are a lot more hidden gems in Vietnam that have not been mainstreamed yet. So if you do live in Thailand or know about Thailand, there's a lot more mainstream populated areas. So it makes sense why it would be a bit more expensive. But is that the reason you'd think someone would want to take all their family and their business and move to another country just because it's slightly more cheaper? Because eventually Vietnam will catch up.
Yeah, I mean, when I was last in Vietnam just before the lockdown, I mean, it was extremely cheap, comparable to Thailand. I think, this was everything from taxis to hotels to food and dining. It was very, very cheap and comparable. So I think that Vietnam is hands down a lot cheaper than Thailand and what Thailand offers, especially in them more touristy and expat markets, which is where, the influx of us coming to live there will probably migrate to. But I think the issue with Vietnam is that, for tourists and expats, I mean, because they use the US dollar as opposed to, I know they have their own currency, but because the dollar is so prevalent within Vietnam, they tend to make roundings on prices. So instead of it being, 35 cents, it's $1, it's $5, it's $10. So things can get slightly more expensive. And you see this happening in Cambodia, which is also utilizing the US dollar, where as in Thailand, there's just one fixed currency, which is Thai baht. I mean, I've heard of people trying to charge in US dollars, but 99% of times it's Thai baht. So I think in general, Vietnam is a lot cheaper. Okay. But I think, you can get caught in this whole transparency issue with cross-currency conversions, especially to dollars. So I think watch out for that. But I think Vietnam is a cheaper destination to live and travel within.
Okay, you said you had a business in Vietnam. Now let's quickly talk about the business aspects. Is it cheaper to run a business in Vietnam than it is in Thailand? So it could be, on maybe labor costs, maybe taxes, maybe, just running of the business.
So it's a good question. I mean, in terms of setting up a business, it is about, or even more difficult than setting up one in Thailand. Okay. And there's lots of restrictions in relation to foreign-owned businesses that come in and visa restrictions. I think if I was to compare access of quality talent, Vietnam, I believe, is higher than what Thailand offers. So you could probably get more educated people within Vietnam, for whatever reason it is, maybe the schooling system, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that in terms of, the business operations, it's much more difficult to operate in Vietnam than it is within Thailand. I think Thailand's not that easy, right, to operate as a business, especially if you're a foreigner. So in comparables like to like, I would say that Thailand wins in relation to operating a business, but it would be cheaper to keep your business within Vietnam in overall once it's set up.
All right, Mike. Now, let's talk about the tourist aspect of both Vietnam and Thailand. Both of them amazing countries, have a lot to offer to tourists in terms of beaches, the weather, whatever that comes with basically tourism and when you want to explore a country. But in terms of tourist satisfaction, I've got a quick stat for you here. Over 50% of tourists that come to Thailand eventually return and come back for a return trip to Thailand because they've enjoyed the experience. However, only 10% of tourists go back to Vietnam.
That's interesting. I'm trying to think why. I think maybe it might be cultural. I mean, Thailand, the hospitality that Thai people show is very welcoming, and that culture really is prevalent within Thailand. And I didn't really feel the same when I was in Vietnam. I mean, they're very nice people, but you know, that Thai culture is a real winner.
Okay.
I think you know, a lot of tourists go to the beaches. I would say hands down, Thailand probably has the best beaches in Southeast Asia. The more diverse mix, you know, it's very much, you know, you can go different areas and there's different types of beaches from, you know, some of the islands, some of the bigger places which have, you know, great beach locations. And the weather is usually good all year round. I mean, we have a rainy season, but it's hot all year round. Where I think Vietnam has a more diverse climate, which has a winter and a summer. So, you know, that can be attractive to some people. But I think for Europe and the West that are looking for a hot beach destination, which is the majority of tourists coming here, I think Thailand probably is a hands-down winner on that one.
Okay, right. Thanks for that, Mike. All right, we're going to take a quick break and look at the regional headlines. We'll be back with more comparisons right after this. Protesters have destroyed around a dozen military-owned communication towers in Myanmar, after the country's self-proclaimed shadow government issued a call for a defensive war against the junta. A fire tore through an overcrowded Indonesian prison block in the early hours of Wednesday when most inmates were asleep, killing 41 people and injuring dozens of others in Jakarta. Indian authorities are restricting major religious festivals that start this week and attract huge crowds, warning that a new COVID-19 wave had already begun in the financial capital, Mumbai. Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte on Wednesday accepted his party's nomination to run for vice president in next year's election, forging ahead with a plan criticized by rivals as a cynical move to maintain his political power. China has banned private tutors from giving classes online or in unregistered venues such as residential buildings, hotels, and coffee shops, ramping up its efforts to stamp out all for-profit tutoring. Welcome back to Good Morning Thailand. This is Jay again with Mike. Mike, we're talking about what's a better place to live in Southeast Asia, and today we're comparing Thailand and Vietnam in specific. Now, to continue our conversation from earlier, let's do a little more comparisons between the two countries. Let's talk about visa. Now, when you want to go to a country, obviously, as an expat, as a foreigner, as a business person, you need a visa. I believe Vietnam is a lot more limited, not difficult, but limited in terms of the visas you can go to Vietnam. Visa on arrival is only available to countries from people from ASEAN. You can apply for an e-visa. You can go to your embassy and get a visa from there. And business visas can only be provided through sponsors. And if you don't have a sponsor, at maximum you could get it for 6 months to a year. But in Thailand, we do have many different choices for people. And whether you're a tourist or coming for business, we have tourist visas. Visa on arrival is pretty good in Thailand. We have business visas for long-term business visas. We have the elite visas. We have retirement visas. We have visas for marital purposes.
Yep.
What do you think about this topic?
Well, I think that before COVID, I mean, we can't talk about now because, you know, most countries are locked right now, but I think, you know, in a normal scenario, I think Thailand was very much geared up for tourism. I mean, they really went for it. The visa on arrival was accessible to most countries in the world, right? Which was great. It was very easy to come here. You just come through, you know, stamp, you're through. Whereas Vietnam is a much more bureaucratic process and much more difficult. So I think for tourists, I think, yep, Thailand is much more accessible. Mm-hmm. And I think the same for the other type of visas. You know, I mean, me and Jay are not experts in Vietnam. We live here in Thailand. So, you know, if anyone who's going to go out there and say, you know, we're not sure. I mean, we're definitely biased towards Thailand. This is our experience here. But just our research online is showing that Thailand probably has a better visa system for people coming to stay for a short period of time and to potentially live.
Yeah, a lot of the people always complain about generally the elite visas and that, you know, it's only for the people who can afford it. But I believe that is what it's meant for. I mean, yes, it's called an elite visa for a reason. It's not affordable by most people. It is for those people who've actually gone all in and perhaps invested a lot into Thailand and its economy and its business, and perhaps they're the only people who are basically rewarded with a 10-year visa. Do you think that's fair?
I mean, life isn't fair. I
True.
think, unfortunately, that is the way, you know, society is geared up to, you know, to give people who have privilege more options. So I think the elite visa is a good option if you have that type of money to spend. If you do, I would, you know, get it. You know, it gives you easy access to the country, and you can stay as long as potentially you want, etc., etc. So I think that, yes, it's probably not fair for anyone who can't afford it, but I think these are the options that are available.
Right, Mike. Now let's have a quick look at healthcare. Now, a lot of people from Western countries actually consider Thailand a hub and a place where they come for to do their surgeries, their operations, and just general healthcare. And I know Vietnam has its own hospitals and probably has a decent healthcare system. But I think in terms of healthcare, Thailand is considered a bit of a hub for a lot of Western countries.
Oh, 100%. I think that, I mean, one of the businesses that we own is called mymeditravel.com, big plug there, which focuses on medical tourism. Now, Thailand's become one of the largest medical tourism destinations globally. If I make my comparison back to the NHS, which is, you know, the UK health system, I know this is obviously free to utilise, but as an expat living here, the Thailand health system, if you're paying or you have insurance, is so good. I mean, you don't have the concept of seeing a GP. You can go straight to see a specialist in any field. There is not large queuing times. This is if you're going private. So this is not for the Thai demographic who are looking for free healthcare based on, you know, their national insurance contributions here. This is if you have insurance, you're paying privately. So just to put that out. But if you are, it is the best healthcare system that I've had access to, and it's amazing. I've been to hospitals in the US, the UK, and Thailand, and these hospitals are very geared up to deal with, you know, expats and tourists quickly in a great manner, and they're very professional.
They are very professional, very good. And as a local, I can give you the opinion of a local that these hospitals are very expensive. In general, you know, a lot of the hospitals, the big hospitals in Thailand, are not affordable for general public. They are quite expensive. However, at the same time, when I meet expats, when I meet foreigners who go to these healthcare systems, they actually go there because it's a lot cheaper here to do these surgeries than compared to their own country. So, you know, if you look at it from the local aspect, yes, it's expensive. However, if you can compare it to Western countries, it's a lot cheaper, and that's one of the reasons they come here.
Oh, 100%. For cosmetics, in terms of, because we had the platform, we can tell. I mean, for cosmetics, whether it's breast augmentation or, you know, a change to your nose or, you know, any form of cosmetic surgery, Thailand's a hotbed for this type of stuff. I know there's going to be everyone out there talking about, you know, lady boys and, you know, I'm just talking about generic, you know, operations which a lot of different people would get. Thailand's a hotbed, and, you know, the question is you can go and get this elsewhere, but you can come to Thailand, it's cheaper, the quality of service is better, and you can recover in an idyllic, you know, destination as opposed to, you know, a hospital, you know, in maybe the UK or the US. So Thailand's a hotbed for medical tourism. So I think what that's created is a very good private healthcare system, which, you know, is extremely good. And the doctors are not trained predominantly in Thailand. They all do their parts in the UK or US or more established countries to get their training. So the qualities of doctors are very, very good within this country.
Right. Okay, now to the final topics of language and scams. Now, every time you go to a tourist destination, or are living in a foreign country, at least you'd want to be understood. I guess that would be the minimum requirement. That I hope people understand what I'm saying. As foreigners and as tourists, we often go to another country and expect them to know our language without really caring about their own language and trying. But sometimes it's understandable. You know, you go to a new country, it's a tourist destination. People should be able to speak a couple of words at least. In Thailand, what's been your experience? Like when I'm talking about when you go on holiday to remote parts. I'm not talking about Phuket, but like, you know, to other parts in Thailand, and maybe you're driving by a village. What's been your experience about people being able to communicate with you?
So, I mean, in the tourist destinations, I mean, English is very readily spoken. And, you know, when you go to the more rural destinations, probably you're still limited, but they still kind of get it. Now, the question is this a good thing or a bad thing? I think people leave their home country to look for something different, a different type of cultural experience. You know, and some of the attraction to Thailand was initially that, it was so different from where I lived previously that, this was really enjoyable. As English becomes more, prevailing and more well spoken, I think it loses some of its charm.
Yeah.
So I think there's advantages to English speaking in relation to the countries coming in and understanding more, but it loses some of that charm, that unknown factor.
Yeah.
So I say, for Vietnam, the cultural differences and diversity is much wider, and I think for that, Vietnam is a hands-down winner in relation to what it offers. But if you want to come and just understand everything, I think Thailand is probably, English is much more prevalent here.
Final one would be scams. A lot of people talk about Thailand and they talk about the tourist scams and, oh my God, they just want your money, jet ski scam and this scam and that scam. It's a land of scams, as some people would say. Do you have any information or any experience? I'm sure Vietnam and Thailand, both as a tourist destination, have scams. There's going to be bad people no matter where you go doing bad things. But I believe they're equal, because as I did my research, I saw that Vietnam had a lot of tourist scams as well. I'm not saying one is better than the other. Do you have anything to add?
I mean, I've been scammed in Vietnam on the first day of arrival. I mean, one of my friends had his bag and motorbike just pulled it off him. I mean, I guess that's not a scam, that's more crime.
Yeah.
But I think because there's such a large amount of tourism coming to Thailand, scams are more prevalent. So I reckon there are more scams in Thailand than there would be in Vietnam, because there's so many foreigners coming here who don't really know how this all works. So I think the ecosystem for scammers is much better, right?
Yeah.
There's much more people, much more stupid people walking along.
That's right. In terms of population, Thailand's around 70 million. In terms of population, Vietnam's almost, I think at 98, they're almost 100 million. So there are a lot more people, but you're right. So many people travel to Thailand more. It's a lot more popular destination. Therefore, it should have a higher crime rate or a higher scam rate.
Yeah, and then we've spoken about the scams in many aspects. I mean, we had another show which I did about 2 weeks ago about real estate scams,
right.
But there's all the common normal scams. The ping pong, bar scam. Where you go in and they charge you huge amounts of money, and and this is all targeting unknowing tourists.
Right.
They've got no idea. They just turn up and it's like, hey, come in here. We'll give you a free taxi and you can buy a suit. I mean, we've all been through this process in Bangkok. So I would say Thailand is definitely a more scammier environment than Vietnam.
Yeah.
So I think Vietnam's a winner on that aspect.
Right, and as a tourist, if you do travel to any of the countries, wherever you go, do a little research before so you don't get scammed. That would be my only advice as a person who has been scammed. So that's it for the show today. I hope you enjoyed this quick look at Thailand and Vietnam and a little comparisons of how the countries differ and are similar in some ways. I'd like to thank Mike for joining us today.
Thank you.
And I'd like to thank Jason behind the buttons. And I'd also, again, help tell the viewers that help us reach 100,000 subscribers by this weekend. A lot of you aren't subscribed. Please click like on the video, comment if you've enjoyed it, and please click the subscribe button for me and for Thaiger OnlyFans. We'll make it happen. We hope you've enjoyed the show today and have a great Thursday. It's goodbye from everyone.